but with Good morning and welcome to the NIMAC for Publishers and Vendors Preparing and Submitting Files webinar. My name's Nicole Gaines. I am the NIMAC Project Director, and I'm joined this morning by Liz Schaller. She is the NIMAC Manager. She's going to be helping with some housekeeping as we go through the presentation this morning. And what we're going to be talking about today is a little bit more in the weeds. This is part 2 of a 2-part series for publishers and vendors. Our first session, if you weren't able to make it, it is going to be available on our website archived, so you would be able to view it. But that was a presentation that focused more on kind of the higher level aspects of working with the NIMAC. It also included a demo working in your actual account, kind of walking through some of that functionality. So if you're interested in that, you could take a look at it. What we're really going to be talking today, again, is a little bit more on the technical side. And I just would like you to know that we will have plenty of time for questions. We want folks to be able to interact with us. Liz will be watching the chat, and you're also, if you do have a microphone, you will be welcome to use your microphone to ask questions. Last thing I want to just note is, again, this session will also be archived, and the PowerPoint will also be available if you would like to download it and have it as a resource. A lot of the things that I'll be talking about are hyperlinks in this, and so this could be a kind of a helpful resource to get to some of those resources as we are going through, and to have those for future reference. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, we've actually basically got 3 pieces to this. We're going to talk a little more generally about the key resources for preparing NIMAS files, as well as NIMAC metadata. We're also going to be talking about the file validation process, how to use the validation wizard, and then also we're going to touch just really quickly on some best practices issues, some common mistakes that are made with files that can have an adverse impact on usability, and how to avoid those. And then the third major chunk is we're going to talk about the batch file delivery process and the daily FTP report. So it's actually, we're going to actually cover a lot of territory this morning. But like I say, if you have any questions as we go through, we'll be moving through some of these topics fairly quickly. But do feel free to stop us at any point if you have questions or would like some further clarification. So without further ado, we'll go right into the section on preparing NIMAS files. And basically, if you are someone who is in the business of creating NIMAS, if you are a publisher who's involved with this or a conversion vendor, hopefully you are well acquainted already with these 3 primary resources for producing NIMAS correctly. The first one, of course, is the NIMAS 1.1 specification. This is the only file format that we are permitted to receive in the NIMAC, and the specification details what the appropriate tagging and some of the other requirements are for the NIMAS file set. The second one is the DAISY structure guidelines. NIMAS 1.1 is a subset of DAISY, which means that it draws from that document type definition, uses those established elements in the XML, and the DAISY structure guidelines are really important in terms of providing guidance on when to use which tags and how tags can be used together to structure major components of the book. The third resource is the NIMAC metadata guidelines, and this basically is a document that is going to explain to you what the required metadata are to submit with your file set and how to supply those using the correct tags in the NIMAS file OPF. So again, talking a little bit about the specification, it basically defines the required file set components, which includes an XML file, an OPF file, the cover, title page, or copyright page PDF, and the images folder. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that PDF later. And it also defines, again, the baseline element set for use in the XML tagging. In addition to the requirements of NIMAS, I would like to just underscore that there are some optional features that you can include in NIMAS, but which are not required by the specification itself. The first one is that you are welcome to use the full DAISY element set for XML tagging. There are some options that are optional for NIMAS, and you can use those if you would like. More importantly, though, is that MathML, which is markup, of course, for math and scientific notation, it is not required for the NIMAS 1.1 specification, but it is very valuable to include in the file set. So we do encourage folks to include MathML to express math equations and other scientific notation. The third thing that is optional for NIMAS is alt text for images. We're not going to talk a whole lot about alt text in this presentation, but alt text can also be something that is really valuable to include in the NIMAS file set. However, when it is included, we do strongly recommend that it is provided by editorial staff at the publisher, as these are the individuals who are going to have the best understanding of the instructional context of the image and how to best capture that in the NIMAS file. Another thing in terms of the NIMAS 1.1, this is not optional. These relate to requirements, but it's important to note that if you go back and look at the actual NIMAS 1.1 specification or the actual IDEA regulations, it's important to note that there are some references to metadata there. However, those were preliminary requirements that were established in 2006 at the point of the publication of those regulations. And the actual full requirements were established in the process of developing the project by the NIMAC. And so we do want to ensure that folks understand that while there are some metadata requirements in the actual published specification, the full metadata requirements are actually published by the NIMAC, and those are available on our website. And that's really where you want to go to get the up-to-date information about supplying metadata. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail now about the DAISY structure guidelines. And one of the things that's really important about NIMAS, we're going to talk a little later about automated file validation, and then also a little bit about the file review process. But it's really important to note that there is not an automated way for us to determine whether material is tagged correctly in accordance with the DAISY structure guidelines. So we really rely very much on publishers and vendors to be acquainted with the structure guidelines and to be applying those correctly to the content that they're providing in the NIMAS file. It is a requirement for NIMAS to be tagged in accordance to the DAISY structure guidelines, and so it's just a really important piece. Following the guidelines helps ensure that the files are tagged correctly and will be usable in producing accessible formats. And obviously this is really important for all of us. We all go to a lot of effort in terms of producing NIMAS, submitting files, making them available to the states to use in accessible formats. And so we want to make sure that these files are high quality, that they're usable, and that students will be able to benefit from the files that are in the repository. So in terms of using the DAISY structure guidelines, I want to just underscore a couple of places that you can go in terms of getting access to the document, which is pretty elaborate and pretty, it's not exhaustive, but it is pretty extensive. So one of the benefits is that the guidelines are easy to follow. They are very well structured, and they also provide real life examples that include, in many cases, actual images from printed books so that you can compare and look. And if your book looks like this is what the tagging should look like. So one of the ways that you can look for particular elements is the DAISY Structure Guidelines table of contents. And this is a good starting place if you are not really acquainted with the resource, to just kind of skim through. And you can also go, there's an index of elements if you are concerned about a specific tag and using it correctly, you can really zero in by going to the index of elements. So this screen here is just a screenshot showing the table of contents, and there's kind of some information at the top regarding the technical aspects of the DAISY structure guidelines. And then if you kind of go and look at the second half of the image here, we can actually see that there's a table of contents for the structure guidelines as a whole, which includes a statement of principles, a preface, a foreword, and then the several parts: introduction to structured markup, major structural elements, block elements, inline elements, tables, etc. And so it's really laid out quite nicely in terms of being able to find what you're looking for. On the other hand, the index of elements, again, this is where you can go if you say, for example, hey, I want to really make sure that I'm using the body matter element correctly, or the bridgehead element, or what have you. You can go and actually zero in on these specific elements in this way. So this next screen here, what I basically have is if you actually click on something from that index list, it's going to take you to a kind of a more brief display. In this case, what I'm showing is that if you've clicked on sidebar from the index, it's going to give you a brief description. Element sidebar contains information supplementary to the main text, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a further hyperlink if you want to go to the detailed information. So when we go to that detailed information screen, we see a more extensive definition. We also see a section that includes syntax that shows you exactly how to use this in reference to other related tags. And then it also further down, we don't actually have this captured throughout here. It actually provides you explicit examples. So another thing that I want to talk about is just the major structural elements. Again, you can get to this from the table of contents of the DAISY structure guidelines. And this is really going to be helpful for you with more complex structures to ensure that you're handling them correctly. For example, if you are tagging the table of contents for your book, it will show you how to work with a range of tags that are involved in tagging that particular type of content. So we encourage you to become familiar with that section of the guidelines as well. So in this screen, we basically just have the screen capture. If we are to go to the table of contents item in major structural elements, it's going to show you, it's going to kind of explain to you, what this structure is, how you should use the markup. And again, there are actually a couple of different real life examples that are included here to show you how to create that nested list and provide this information correctly. And this is just a specific example of a correctly tagged table of contents using a nested list form. So that's kind of a quick tour of the DAISY structure guidelines. I do want to note that the structure guidelines do include a lot of examples, but they're not exhaustive. You're not going to necessarily find an example for everything that you might run across. So we do welcome you to get in touch if you have questions about a specific book that you're tagging, or something that's just a little unusual. Please feel free to get in touch. We are happy to assist with those kinds of questions. So as we're talking about this, I want to also note that the NIMAC has a range of resources on our website to support you as you're producing NIMAS files. The NIMAC resources for publishers, again, that's kind of a link out, that first bulleted item here, to that resources page. And you can find archived training videos, PowerPoints, and also some other resources for working in this system. So we would encourage you to take a look, if you haven't been to our website, to look at those. Invite you to do that. And this is just a screenshot here of the NIMAC homepage showing that NIMAC, showing that publishers and conversion houses link there to get to that page. Additionally, there are resources at the National Ames Center website. The National Ames Center is actually the project that has the purview over the NIMAS specification itself. So in that capacity, they have a lot of resources for NIMAS as well. And we actually last year worked extensively with staff at the Ames Center as they did a major overhaul of their project website. And so we were actually able to, in that process, do a lot of updating for the NIMAS resources. So this is the place where you can go to get the NIMAS specification. There's also a brief document there on creating NIMAS files that kind of walks you through some of the technical issues. And there are also a couple of NIMAS exemplars available there. These are basically sort of simple NIMAS files that show all of the basic tagging that is employed in the NIMAS XML and also with the OPF and the images. And so these are downloadable, and they are freely available. So if you are interested in kind of seeing an example of a valid file that has good tagging and good metadata, we encourage you to take a look at those exemplars. And this is just a screenshot of the NIMAS technical specification page on the National Ames Center website. So, and there again, their website is aem.cast.org if you would like to go there, or you can just Google them, National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, we're going to move on now to talking about NIMAS metadata and how to supply that with your files. So all NIMAS files must include the required metadata in the OPF of the file set. And this is something that is really important because it's the key way to ensure that your materials can be successfully located in the online system. Metadata review is an important part of the file certification process, and it is not something that happens. We'll talk a little bit again about the validation process and the extent to which metadata is looked at in the validation, but a manual review is actually where we ensure that the metadata are complete and correct. And we do encourage you to download the metadata guidelines at any time and use this as a resource, use it for guidance as you are preparing the metadata with your file sets. So to talk a little bit more about the importance of it, I'd like to just underscore that in terms of the NIMAC system, we actually really like it. We think that the search that's included for users is really pretty nice, but it's not a Google search. And so in other words, if the ISBN in the metadata is a digit off, the NIMAC isn't going to say, did you really mean this, or give you suggestions. It's a precise search that looks for identical matches in terms of the metadata that you provide. So this just is something that I like to mention because it underscores why it's important for the metadata to be good quality and to be complete. In terms of the way the system is going to interact with your files, whether you manually deliver the file or deliver it by FTP, the system record is actually going to be pulling that metadata right from the OPF to create that system record. So I like to just note that not including required metadata can cause the metadata extraction and your upload to fail. So that can happen whether you manually upload the file or deliver it by FTP. So that's just another reason why you do want to make sure that you've got everything that you need included in that OPF before you go to upload the file or deliver it by FTP. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have a metadata review that is a part of the certification process. And this is a manual review that staff do. Again, there are certain things that automated validation can detect, but it cannot detect whether or not your metadata is complete and accurate. And so what we will do as a part of that manual checking is we will look at the OPF metadata and we're going to compare that against the PDF that you've provided in the file set. So kind of an important piece here is that for our purposes, we don't receive any print books. So we're not looking at any print books to determine if the metadata are correct. We're looking at that PDF and saying, hey, does the ISBN, title, author, publisher, copyright, does it all match? Because again, when we're thinking about that teacher in the classroom who needs to access a file or request material in an accessible format, that's what they're going to be using to say, hey, we need Braille for this book or large print for this book or what have you. So we basically follow standard library cataloging processes and practices to ensure that the metadata are correct. And also we will do checking, of course, with the XML file to make sure that that XML file reflects the same information. So one of the things we just note is that this happens less often now, but it used to be in the earlier days of NIMAC, we would sometimes get metadata that were used internally to track books, for example, an abbreviated form of the title or what have you. And you know, if you use different metadata, we know that there are a lot of different ways that in production processes that items may be tracked, but for our purposes, that print book itself is the authoritative source for the NIMAS metadata. As another aside, in terms of metadata corrections, we're pleased to let you know that NIMAC staff can and routinely do make minor metadata corrections at the point of file review so files can be certified. This is just something, it benefits students because it makes it possible for us to certify files more quickly, and it benefits publishers and vendors because it limits the number of files that have to be resubmitted with corrections. And just to give you an example of that, say, for example, the PDF of the book shows that, hey, the copyright date is 2022. The metadata supplied in the OPF actually said 2020. We can actually just make that correction for you. It will be saved to the system, and it will also be saved to the OPF so that that OPF is correct as it travels with the file if it's downloaded, when it's downloaded by a user. We do, however, you know, if there are cases where metadata, there are a lot of corrections that need to be made or many files that may require correction, we will sometimes need to bounce that back to the vendor if that's the case. As an aside, in terms of the NIMAC project, we are a small shop. We have in terms of staff, we have 2 NIMAC specialists who are involved in file review. So we are a small group of folks. And so, you know, we do what we can, but if we, depending on our workload and our ability to address multiple issues, we may have to bounce that back for correction by the vendor. So again, we do make the NIMAC validation, the NIMAC metadata guidelines available on the website. You're welcome to download those at any time. And if you're a publisher that's working with a vendor, we would just encourage you, even if you're not actually preparing the files yourself, we encourage you to just take a look at the metadata guidelines or at least the quick start guide that's available on our website, just so that you have an awareness of what metadata need to be provided, as that will help you ensure that you're giving the vendor all of the information they need to create that file set. And we're also more than happy to help you get started with the process of creating a good OPF exemplar for a program, or for, you know, if you've got a complete curriculum and you've got 3 different types of components in that curriculum, we're more than happy to help you kind of come up with a good OPF exemplar for each of those components so that you can have consistency across the files that you're submitting. We welcome metadata queries anytime. You're welcome to email us at nimac@aph.org. We're happy to take a look at your OPF and your PDF and say, you know, yep, you're on the right track, or it looks mostly good, but don't forget to include the series, or it looks like the publication date looks a little squirrely. We can provide you that feedback, and that can especially be helpful if you've got a really large program with a lot of files. We can help you make sure that you're on the right track. You know, one of the things that we just like to avoid is, you know, if we can catch an issue at the very beginning, of the submission of a big program, that's much better than having to come back after a vendor has delivered, you know, a batch delivery of 100 files, and to say, actually, all 100 files have, you know, this issue and will have to be corrected. So just do feel free to get in touch with us at any time about that. One of the things that we talked about in session 1 of this 2-part series was the Excel to OPF tool. This is something we're not going to go into detail with it again this time, but I did want to just let folks know that this is a free tool within the system. If you would like to take advantage or just experiment with it, it will help you to generate correctly tagged and formatted OPF metadata. And you're welcome to look at it at any time. Playing around with it doesn't commit you to having to use it in your processes, but if you haven't ever taken a look at it, it can just be really, really helpful in terms of making sure that what you've got is consistent and well tagged and well formatted. So just take a look at it if you're interested. Again, you can download the metadata template from the resources tab of your NIMAC account. It's very intuitive from that standpoint. You just fill out the sheet and the system will email you a zip file that includes OPFs with all of the metadata that you need. So, and if you have any questions, if you have any issues in using the tool, just reach out. We're happy to help with that. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is file validation. Once you've got your file together, you've got your OPF, you've got your, you know, all of the components, your images, your XML, everything is ready to roll. What you want to do next is you want to run the file through the automated validation process before you submit it to the NIMAC. And I do want to just note that earlier this year, the NIMAC released a new validation wizard for publishers and vendors. We were pretty excited about this. It was a completely new tool that was designed and built, which replaced the validation wizard that had actually been developed in 2006 and used since that time. So one of the things about this is that it provided a new level of file validation and checking, which was also implemented into the NIMAC online system. So, so if you are still using the older validation wizard, we encourage you to use the newer one because that level of checking is what we actually have implemented currently. So in terms of the NIMAS validation process, it's important to note that files that fail automated validation are rejected for upload by the system, whether or not you manually upload or if you deliver the files through the FTP process. So basically, validating files before you attempt to upload or before you deliver by FTP can just help you save time later. NIMAS validation, just to kind of give a comparison in terms of what the old tool did and what the new tool did, the NIMAS validation has always ensured that the XML is well formed, that referenced images are present in the images folder, and that the file validates to the NIMAS DTD and the MathML DTD if MathML is present in the file. So the new tool does that just as the old tool did. But it also has some new additional features here. So one of the things that it does is that it just has a much more thorough examination of the file, including some file quality checks that it does look for some tagging issues, not all tagging issues, but some common tagging issues you may see some feedback on. And it also provides feedback related to missing or invalid OPF metadata. Now, as I mentioned before, the validation, the automated validation doesn't have any AI in it, so it's not able to actually say, you know, your copyright date is correct, but it can tell you if your copyright date metadata is missing. So in order to kind of help folks ensure that at least the metadata tags that are required are present, we do have that level of checking in the new validation wizard. So again, we just encourage you to use that new tool to get that additional level of feedback. In terms of using the tool, it's the same basic premise as the original tool. It is a small standalone program. We have available now a Windows-based version. We are continuing to work on the Mac version, and it has taken us a bit longer than we had hoped. There were some development glitches with that version, but it is still in the pipeline, and we are hoping to release it at some point this summer. But basically what you do is once you've installed the tool on your machine, you just navigate to the location of the zipped file and then click the validate button. So it's really straightforward. One of the things that is different with the new version is that you don't have to unzip your file. This was something that was a little bit of a pain sometimes with the original, because once you had your file together, you had to, if it was already zipped and ready to roll, you had to unzip it to run the validation. But you can just run your completed zipped file with the new validation wizard. So once you click that validation button, the results are going to display on the screen, and you can also export the report if you wish as a CSV file. So just to kind of walk through those screens, this is what the actual user interface looks like when you open the tool, and you'll see that there's a browse button for you to go and navigate to your zip file. Then you just click the blue button. So again, very simple, very straightforward. You're going to see a little green bar that goes across the screen to show you that that validation is in process. And then what you're going to see is output on the screen with the results. And in this case, we have a file that had no output. It said successfully validated the NIMAS package. No issues. So this is a situation where there were no errors, no warnings, and no best practices issues. So, and those indeed are the types of validation output that you could possibly see. And just to clarify what these levels of output are with the tool, errors must be corrected or the file cannot be uploaded to the NIMAC system. So you definitely want to zero in on anything that is an error. Warnings are output where correction is recommended, but it is not required. And best practice is kind of the third level down. It's information to consider in preparing the NIMAS files. It's kind of a little bit of a red flag, but the output may or may not be applicable. In other words, it's looking and it's determining that what you've provided is a little unusual. It may still be okay for the type of material, but it's not something commonly seen. So you might want to double check it. So in this screen here, what we have is the actual output of the validation wizard. And this is a case where there were actually 4 errors, 2 warnings, and 2 best practices issues. And again, when you actually look at this, it's going to be your output is actually going to be shown in a table format. And the most important thing to start with, of course, is the leftmost column, which is going to show you the type of error, the type of output, whether it is error, warning, or best practice. And these will all actually default in terms of actually showing that organization so that the errors will show up first so that you don't miss them. Then what you're going to see is you're going to see the moving from left to right, the file that was affected, the event type, which just means what the issue is, and so forth. And then as you move over to the right, it's just going to provide you additional detail about what the issue is. And so the output is going to be very detailed in terms of what the issue is. So hopefully it's going to be really clear to you in terms of like, oh, this is the issue. This is what I have to correct. If you have any questions, though, if you ever run across an error where it's like it generated an error, but I'm not really sure what this means, do feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help with that. It hasn't come up very often, but once or twice we've had errors where the validation wizard will generate something, but without having the detail, and so we've had to kind of go back and investigate with our vendor and get that worked out. But for the most part, you should be getting a good level of information to help you resolve the issue. The last thing that I want to mention with regard to this is that occasionally, this doesn't generally happen with the manual upload because your upload will fail, and at the process, during that process, you will identify it. But sometimes if you upload files by FTP, if you get a message back that the file is corrupt, this generally indicates that somehow the file was corrupted during the process of compressing the file, creating your zip file. So we do just recommend that after you've zipped your file, just click it and open it again. And if it opens, the file is probably okay and not corrupt. It just kind of can, again, save you a little bit of time in terms of not having to submit it again after you've gone through all of the process to FTP it. And nobody wants to get a report back that says, oh, the file was corrupt, you have to do this again. So now we're going to move along and talk a little bit about NIMAS file creation tips. And this is just, we're going to do just kind of a little bit of a whirlwind here of several things that come up sometimes that can have an adverse impact on the usability of the file. And we want to just make sure that you have these on your radar as you're producing your NIMAS files. So number one, we want to remind folks to please include the title page information in the XML. The contents of the title page, or if you do not have a title page that has all of the bibliographic information, the cover, you will want to transcribe the cover in the XML file itself. And obviously, this is going to be really important because if someone uses an automated process to create an accessible format from your book, we want to be sure that they know what is the title, the author, the publisher, that the imprint. And it's kind of amazing sometimes that we do still receive files sometimes where this information is missing in the XML. And it's just really important that it be there. We want to ensure that this information is present in any accessible file that is created. Any accessible format that's created from your NIMAS file. So as a further clarification, if you have a title page that has all of the information that's found on the cover, you don't have to transcribe that information twice in the XML. You can just start with the title page. But we do find that it's not uncommon in K through 12 materials that really important bibliographic information, like the title or the ISBN, or again, the publisher imprint, state edition, sometimes this information only appears on the cover. And in those cases, the cover must be transcribed in the XML. As a further note on that, you may be thinking, well, if I include the doc title, is the doc title good enough? And while the doc title is required for NIMAS, many conversion processes do not recognize the doc title as actually content in the XML file. So it's still important, even if you have everything that you need in that doc title, you want to ensure that that title page is also transcribed in the XML file. Tip number two, be sure your PDF that you're including in the file set includes all of the required information that we need in order to review your file. So the title page and copyright page for the book are always required in the PDF. But similarly to that XML transcription, if there is key information that is only found on the cover of the book, please include the covers in your PDF. So again, what we're going to be looking for when we're looking at the PDF and we're reviewing that file set, the complete title of the book. Sometimes it's surprising how often the complete title of a book, including a subtitle or a component title, is only included on the cover. That happens a lot. ISBNs, it's sometimes the case where the ISBN for material is only provided on the back cover. That's something that happens sometimes. If that's the case, we really need that back cover to be transcribed in the XML. We really need that back cover to be included in the file set. Copyright statement as well. This is a little less common. That's usually going to be found on your copyright page. But publisher imprint, sometimes that publisher imprint is only found on the cover. We need for you to provide the cover in the file set. and that cover transcribed in the XML. Tip number 3, avoid large PDF file sizes. This sometimes comes up where we will receive a NIMAS file and that PDF is, 70 megabytes, 100 megabytes. And we just want to clarify that the PDF that you're providing in that file set is not used in the production of any accessible format. So it does not need to be a quality, PDF that would be suitable for creating a printed book. The PDF is only for file verification purposes, and so smaller is better. Having a really big PDF in your NIMAS file, it's going to add to download times for the user, as well as for us when we're reviewing that file set. But it doesn't add value. It doesn't add value. So if you're preparing your file and you're seeing, oh, this PDF is, it's 80 megabytes, resave it for us and just, make it a smaller file, because, we just need to be able to see the information. It's not going to be used to produce any type of format. And so smaller is better. The final thing there on this one is just that occasionally we will accidentally get entire PDFs or PDFs for the entire book. We cannot accept these. So be sure that this is kind of the flip side of that complete PDF issue, and that is that we want your PDF to include all of the required metadata, but not the entire book. Tip number 4, we would ask that you not include metadata in the XML file. There is metadata that can sometimes, if you are producing full DAISY, you can include metadata in the head tags. This is not valid for NIMAS. In the NIMAS format, we only provide metadata in the OPF, and the specification calls for the head tags to be empty. So we just ask that you not include it. You don't need to worry about it. Just make sure that your metadata is complete in your OPF and you are good to go. And tip number 5, be sure to check for and remove, if necessary, any extraneous files in the zip file. Having files that are not a part of the NIMAS file set in that zip file can sometimes cause your upload to fail or the automated processing to fail. This comes up most commonly if a Mac computer is used to compress the file. There's something about the Macintosh computers where sometimes some of these extraneous files will end up included in the zip archive, and we just want you to look for those. Make sure that if they are generated in your process, delete them before you submit the file. And we also just want you to be sure not to include any other extraneous file, like a screenshot of the validation wizard or any other internal communication between the vendor and the publisher. Anything that you need to send related to file validation or anything else with the production process, just don't include it in the zip file. Get it to the person in some other way. Okay, so the next thing I want to just talk briefly about are some reminders with regard to MathML. Again, MathML is optional for NIMAS, but it is really valuable, so we do encourage you to provide it. In terms of having it in the file set, there is a short document, again, on our website that is called MathML in NIMAS, and it's on our website, and it includes the information that's shared here if you just are interested in having this specific guidance as a reference for later. One of the important things is that if you've included MathML, you do have to include the correct declaration at the top of the XML file. The current version of MathML that is recommended for NIMAS is MathML 3. I've included on this screen a sample of the declaration for that type of file, or for a file that includes that type of MathML. MathML 2 is it's still acceptable. We recommend that you actually use MathML 3 because that is the current version, but MathML 2 can be accepted. And in this particular slide here, I have shown in red a part of the declaration that is used only for MathML2. The reason that I've highlighted this is that we occasionally see MathML3 declarations that include the content in red, but it is actually not needed unless you are submitting MathML2. So again, just as a heads up on preparing that part of the XML correctly. Fallback images, this is a really important piece. If you do submit MathML in your file, it is still required that fallback images be provided in the file set. And the practical reason for this is simply that while we really value MathML, not all software can work with MathML yet. So we do need to ensure that for folks who are using that file, if they are using conversion software that can't handle MathML, there's another option. And of course, that option is to continue to provide the images in the file set as well. The images should be 300 dpi, just as the rest of the images for the file set. And the way that you're going to reference those is on the alt image attribute of the math tags. And I just have a little sample tag here below where that file path is indicated in red. In terms of alt text for MathML, as with the file set as a whole, is optional. It is not required. However, including the attribute on the tag is. So even if you don't include the actual alt text, we do ask that you include that little alt text attribute on the mmath tag. Another pointer here is simply that unless you're including a excuse me, unless you are including a description of the math expression, please leave the attribute empty. Don't include a placeholder text such as the word equation or the image file name. That kind of content is not useful when the file is converted, and it's just an extra step for the user to strip it out. So it's fine not to include a description, totally fine, but just leave that attribute empty. Oops. Okay, so my finger got a little heavy there and I raced ahead many slides. I think I'm back where I need to be now, so sorry for that. So the last part that I'm going to cover this morning is I'm going to talk a little bit about delivering files and batch delivery procedures. And so basically, the way that it works with the NIMAC is that there are two ways that you can get files to us. You can manually upload the files one at a time using your account, or you can deliver files by FTP. Because of upload times, we generally recommend that if your file is over 250 megabytes, that you go ahead and submit it by FTP. There is no minimum or maximum file size for submitting files by FTP, so you're welcome to deliver all your files by FTP if you would like. In order to do that, you're going to need an FTP login with Overdrive. And so if you already have that, then you're going to know basically the way that you're going to submit those files is by SFTP. And if you need any kind of help with the configuration or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to help with that. And the FTP location is transfer.overdrive.com. If you don't yet have an FTP login and you need to request one, you would just email Overdrive at NIMAC-support@overdrive.com. When you're requesting FTP access, you will need to include your NIMAC login ID for the specific publisher's account if you are a vendor. If you are a publisher, we strongly recommend that you create NIMAC accounts for your individual vendors so they can request their own FTP login. Overdrive really prefers to have FTP logins associated with specific vendor users and not the primary admin account for the publisher. And of course, if you are a vendor, you're going to need a separate FTP login for each publisher that you work with. When you're delivering files through FTP, again, I think it's a pretty straightforward process, but one of the things that's really important for the batch processing is that the batch processing cannot find your files if they are included inside a folder. Sometimes vendors or publishers want to be really neat and tidy, and so they'll put everything in a folder that has the date or just some other way of having files organized. We would ask you not to do that. Just deliver all of your files by dragging them over to the root directory of the FTP. Okay, and so the last thing I want to cover this morning is to talk to you about the daily batch delivery report. And so this has actually been something that was implemented a few years back. And so if you have already been working with the NIMAC for a while, you're probably already familiar with it, but I just want to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about that report. The way that FTP deliveries are processed is that they are processed through that automated process overnight. So the following morning, you are going to get an automated report that details the processing results for any evening that you had files that were automatically processed. So that report is going to go to the user whose email is associated with the FTP login. And so again, if you are a vendor and you've supplied files for multiple publishers, you're going to receive a separate email for each publisher that you submitted files for that prior day. So just as kind of an obvious thing, but just be sure to review every report that you receive, because this is your only notification from Overdrive if a delivery fails. So it's just really important for you to take a look at that. Similarly, if you have a personnel change at your company and that user who was associated with that FTP account, if they're gone, you're going to need to let Overdrive know to update the email address, because we don't want those delivery reports to go into a black hole. So in terms of reading the report, you're going to see a summary at the top of the report that shows your results. And if the report shows no failed uploads, that's really all you need to see, and you don't need to do anything else. Just with a quick glance, you're going to be able to tell, everything's all good, no problems. If it does show failed uploads, though, you going to be wanting to see, looking at the details column so that you can see what has happened, correct the issue, and deliver the file again. So this is a screenshot here from an email, an FTP processing report that shows circled in the upper left, successfully processed new titles, successfully processed resubmission titles, and the report does break out the processing in that way, and it shows that there were no issues. You can also see, again, there's a chart format with the detailed output, and under the penultimate column is the result column, and we can see success for each entry. So this is an example where you just you can glance at it, everything's good, nothing needs to happen. Conversely, in this screenshot here, we see that in the upper left, we see failed to process new titles 1. So we do see that there's an issue there. And again, you're going to see in the results column, you'll also see failure. And you're going to see, again, very similarly to the output of the validation wizard, you're going to see the detailed output in terms of what issue has caused the upload to fail. If you have any questions about that, of course, again, don't hesitate to reach out for any clarification. So again, just to kind of repeat, that daily report is your official notification regarding failed deliveries. So, if you don't look at it, if you ignore it, nobody's going to poke you, a week later and say, hey, did you realize that your file failed? This is the notification. And so, again, just be sure that you read the report every day. If you have questions, let us know. This screen here is just kind of a compiled list of different types of things that can happen. I'm not going to go individually through these. You might want to take a look through them later, but basically just giving some examples of this is what's going to happen. This is the output you'll see if a file is corrupt. Here's the output that you're going to see if the publisher imprint in the OPF is not associated with your account, and so forth and so on. When you do go back and upload corrected files, you don't have to give us any specific notification. As long as if you deliver the files by FTP and, you see the following day that the upload was successful, is fine. You don't have to give us any specific explanation that you have resubmitted the file. It'll all be good. Those files automatically go into the uncertified queue for review for certification. One thing that I will note, though, and is that certified inventory, once your files have been certified, they cannot be resubmitted while they are in the certified inventory. This is just to prevent any upload of duplicate files or to avoid inadvertently resubmitting a file that is already certified. So if there's an intentional need to resubmit a file, for example, we want to resubmit with a new printing. We've got a corrected printing. We'd like to upload a newer file. That's totally fine. Just contact us. We will move that file into stalled for you so that it can be replaced. Oops. And then again, as I just mentioned, that when files are uploaded, they're going to automatically appear in uncertified inventory. So you don't have to provide us a separate notification when you deliver files. We generally review files in the order that they're received, but we're happy to expedite files if there's an immediate need, either by one of your customers or if you have a deadline that you're trying to meet. So, do feel free to get in touch with us with that. If there are any issues identified in the file review, we will get in touch with you with any questions or feedback on that. And that is it for our presentation this morning. We do have just a couple minutes left. If there are any questions, I'm going to look here real quickly and see if there's anything in the chat. And I'm not seeing any questions. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have any questions come in, Nicole, but I did put a link in the chat to our exit survey. If folks could take just a minute to complete that, that would be really helpful for us.
Yes, thank you for that. It's a very, very short survey. It only takes literally 1 or 2 minutes, and OSUP really wants us to get feedback from users, and so we really do value your input on that if you have just a couple minutes and could help us with that. As always, as you move forward in your work, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us for assistance. Our email address is nimac@aph.org. We also have an 800 number, 877-526-4622. And we're always happy to hear from you. So thanks so much again for joining us, and have a great day.